Who is shining so far in Buccaneers training camp? That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Wednesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message, no ads or anything like that. Just text convos with me. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Tykee Smith is quickly endearing himself to teammates and coaches while Barton is being tested early and often. All of that is coming up in a little bit, but let's start with some of the players that are really showing out through the first week of training camp. Earlier this week, I was already talking about rookie wide receiver Jayla McMillan, and man, this kid is just continuing to impress. One of the things that was mentioned on Monday's episode is that he hadn't gone through any full contact practices, no live action snaps in preseason. He's going to get a chance at the ladder next week when the Bucs take on the Cincinnati Bengals. But now he's been through the padded practices in 11-on-11s, and he is still continuing to shine. Bulls talked about McMillan after the Tuesday night practice, saying, quote, "He's another one having a great camp. He's a good football player. Since he's come in, he's made every play since day one. He's very intelligent. He wants to be good. He wants to learn. The receiving group loves him, and he continues to get better and better. I like where he's at. He looks like he looked out of pads. He looked good then. He looks good now." End quote. This kid has been a touchdown machine in camp, regardless of who's defending him. Doesn't matter if it's a corner, if it's a safety, if it's a starter, if it's a backup. He just keeps making plays. And I realize that it's really early in this process, but the competition for wide receiver 3 may already be over. Someone else that was impressive in the Tuesday night practice was running back Bucky Irving, but it was special teams where he was able to show off some of his potential. As you all know, there are new kickoff rules in the NFL. It's kind of if I remember correctly, it's kind of a trial basis for this season, but the Buccaneers were working on that with their 2 returners, one of which was Bucky Irving, and he had one opportunity where it looked like if he would have taken the kickback in a live game, that would have been a touchdown. He would have taken it all the way back for 6 points. And that's what's so intriguing about Irving back there as a potential kick returner this season. If he can have a big impact on games, even when he isn't lining up on the offense, or maybe he's not having as big of an impact on the offense, he can still impact games via special teams. There was a video circulating on Twitter Tuesday night where you saw him make one cut through traffic and then he was gone. For a team that historically has been terrible at kick returns, Irving can flip a game and the momentum with one opportunity. However, there are a few guys that we haven't talked much about, and they're on the defensive side of the ball, and that's linebacker DeLoach and safety Rashad Wisdom. DeLoach was a player that I pointed out early in the process that could make the team as an undrafted free agent, and given the current depth of the linebacking core, he's starting to make his case that he deserves a spot on the roster. Really quick player, solid tackler, understands his assignments and where he needs to be. He's been reliable and steady when given the chance, especially during these 11-on-11 drills, which is really where these players can start to shine in these simulated situations, these simulated down and distance opportunities based on certain areas of the field. You have Levante and KJ and Servassier, sure. But then it's JJ Russell and it's Caleb DeLoach that are really battling it out. Russell, of course, has the advantage given his experience and his longevity with the team. Had a chance to start a game last year and ended up going down to injury. But keep an eye on Caleb. This is a player that is really starting to make some noise. Then there's safety Rashad Wisdom, and this guy seems to have come out of nowhere and really put his stamp on things Tuesday with 2 takeaways. He had an interception and a fumble. In an already really thin position where you have Antoine and Jordan, and then you really have a bunch of players that can line up at corner or safety, Wisdom is making his case to be one of the backups at safety, and as always, contributing on special teams will help him separate himself from any other borderline players. Bowles was asked about Wisdom and said, quote, "He got the pick and he got the fumble right there. I knew he was tough coming in. He showed he's learned and he studies hard. It shows up on tape, so we've got to watch it," end quote. This is a highly competitive camp because, as we've been talking about all off season for you everydayers, you every livers, this is a really talented football team. So players are raising their level of play and practice to compete for a limited number of open roster spots. You figure that there's somewhere in the range of about 45 roster spots that are pretty much already locked in. That means you have 45 players competing for around 8 open spots on the roster and then potentially the practice squad. But one of those 8 openings may not necessarily be the position that you play. So they have to work that much harder to show their value and try to unseat an incumbent player that may have been, quote unquote, locked in, or at the very least believed to be locked in, and they're going out there to straight up steal those jobs from other players, and I love it. I absolutely love the intensity, the playmaking that we've seen so far, and if DeLoach is pushing Russell, as just an example, you have Russell who has to step his game up, which forces DeLoach to then take his play up another notch or two, and it just keeps lifting both players in this battle to try to outdo one another, to outwork them on the field, to make bigger plays, make more impact plays, work harder in the film room, work harder within their position group, in their study sessions and their positional workouts. You're seeing that at wide receiver. You're seeing it at linebacker, at corner, safety, along the offensive line. It's across the board for this team, and I cannot get enough of it. As good and solid as this team has been over the last few years, winning the division, making the playoffs, winning a Super Bowl, I don't think that we have seen a more competitive training camp in Tampa in probably the last decade, maybe going all the way back to the Gruden years. And I sound like a broken record. I know that. Iron sharpens iron. Competition breeds excellence. But all of that is just glaringly obvious in this Buccaneers camp. When you have these guys drafted on day 3, when you have these players that are undrafted, pushing players that have been on this roster for 1, 2, as much as 5 years to fight for playing time, and pushing those players to be even better so that they don't lose their jobs. The Buccaneers are going to be a high-risk football team in terms of their practice squad, with other teams poaching players off of that squad because they're good enough to start in the NFL, but couldn't surpass what was already there on the 53-man roster, couldn't climb up the depth because these players are so good. This is the kind of team that, while expectations on a national scale are low, we know that this is a team that is going to compete and possibly win the division. They are going to be in the playoff hunt. And if they get into the playoffs, they can make some noise as a team that is incredibly talented from top to bottom and has really impressive depth at some of these, insanely important positions. Tykee Smith is going to be an absolute stud. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Time is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. If you want to catch an upcoming Rays game, tickets against the Orioles start at just $16. Then when the Houston Astros come to town, you can get tickets for as low as $15. Right now, you can get Buccaneers regular season tickets as low as $48. And week one against the Washington Commanders, those seats start at just $79. And all of the prices that I mentioned feature GameTime's all-in pricing, so there's not going to be any surprises when you get to checkout. You can wait until the last minute when prices drop, or you can buy them now knowing that you have GameTime's lowest price guarantee. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Everydayers, make sure you're coming back tomorrow. I will be joined by Evan Klosky for a WTSP Thursday. We're going to get his thoughts from the first week of training camp. But in the meantime, if you want to hear the latest news from around all of sports, but you want more than national narratives and you want big stories without fake manufactured screaming, make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without the screaming. Locked On Sports today streams 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For those of you that haven't seen it, or maybe you just generally don't watch it, go check out the latest episode of In the Current on the Buccaneers YouTube page. Not only is it a really cool insight into the scouting and draft process, but it gives you a little peek behind the curtain of the scouting combine. We talk about it during that week, all the formal, the informal meetings that teams have with players. And on that episode, they show some of those meetings. One is with Graham Barton, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, but the other one they show is with safety Tykee Smith. Now, Smith was already an incredibly impressive athlete and football player. You could see that from his time at Georgia. He's versatile, he's fast, he's quick, he's aggressive. One thing that's more apparent than ever, though, is how crazy smart Tykee Smith really is. Watching Smith in that interview break down what he's seeing on film was like watching Gordon Ramsay break down a whole chicken into its parts. I don't know how many of you watch cooking videos. I don't know how many of you love Gordon Ramsay, but there's an actual video where blindfolded, he perfectly dissects a whole chicken into the breasts, the thighs, the wings, the legs, breaks down the entire thing. It's effortless. It's simple. It's an instant understanding of what he is looking at. Mentioned it the other day that Antoine Winfield Jr. was asked about Tykee Smith, and the first words out of his mouth were about how smart he is. That football IQ, that ability to read, comprehend, and react is going to make him a star in Todd Bowles' defense. He's going to have a lot of responsibilities thrown at him. He's going to have a lot of roles thrown at him. And he has to have a mastery of the defense to be as effective as the Buccaneers need him to be. Just like Antoine, just like Levante, he has to understand everything that he's supposed to do, as well as the responsibilities of all the other players on the field with him. Todd Bowles was not shy about letting you know the impact that Smith can have or how smart he is. He was asked about Tykee Smith's football IQ and said, quote, "It's a huge edge. He's come in and he's picked everything up without missing a beat. He has the experience of a 7 or 8 year player, so it seems. He has some things to learn, but he plays so calm and he plays under control. He knows where everything is and can read everything along with his toughness. He's a perfect fit for us," end quote. Smith took the opposite road of Chris Braswell. Braswell stayed at Alabama behind other players and didn't transfer because he felt like it was quitting, like it was running away from a problem, that he was going to fight for his playing time at one of the most prestigious football programs in the nation, and he was not going to run away from competition for more playing time at a lesser program. Tykee Smith went a completely different route. He wanted more competition, tougher competition, a steeper hill to climb. So he went from West Virginia, where he could have been the top dog, the absolute superstar of that program, to a place like Georgia, where he was going to have to battle some of the best players in the nation just to get on the field, then go head to head with more of the best players in the nation, with having to face schools like Alabama, LSU, Florida, Tennessee. He wanted to embrace that challenge. And now the same thing is playing out. He's with the best of the best in the NFL, and he's fighting his way onto the field. Jordan Whitehead even talked about Smith when he was asked which player has caught his eye so far in camp. And he said, quote, Tykee Smith. A lot of the corners are doing well out there. There's a lot of guys, but mainly Tykee coming in, playing nickel, playing safety, just being with him and seeing him. He's definitely learned a lot. When I came in, he's definitely ahead of me from my first year, end quote. It may not be right out of the gate. It may not be week one against Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders. But when we're a few weeks, maybe a month into this season, Tykee Smith is going to be seeing the field more and more, and he's going to start making a big difference in what the defense is able to do. He's going to create opportunities for takeaways. He's going to be crucial on those third down stops. He's an all-around playmaker. And with as fast as he's picked up the nuances of this defense, the more trouble Christian Izien is at losing the starting nickel spot. Like we talked about with DeLoach and Russell, it's going to push Izien to be better, which pushes Tykee to be better, and so on and so forth. There are going to be times this season that Todd Bowles wants Jamel Dean, Zion McCollum, Antoine Winfield Jr., Jordan Whitehead, Tykee, and Izien all on the field at the same time. It's going to be interesting to see how they're all aligned, but those are some heavy hitters when it comes to playmaking. Any one of those can drop into coverage. Any one of those can play zone, can play man. Any one of them can blitz the quarterback. Any one of them can stop the run. It's a spoil of riches for the Buccaneers and Bowles. And he's going to have a solid plan to utilize all of them as much as humanly possible. And I promise you right now, there will be times throughout the season when they get looks from a certain offense, and he's going to have all of those secondary players on the field at once, and it can cause serious problems for that offense. They're not going to know who's going to be the man guy, who's going to be dropping in zone, who's going to be blitzing, who's going to be up in the, within that front seven, almost as an additional linebacker, because every one of them is so talented and so versatile that Bowles can use them in a myriad of different ways. Graham Barton has his welcome to the NFL moment every single day. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want to stop. But with the playoffs having wound down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Right now, the Dodgers are the favorites to win the World Series at plus 320, while the Tampa Bay Rays are selling off players at the deadline and sitting at plus 29,000. If you'd rather get in on some NFL odds early on, the Chiefs and Niners are tied atop the Super Bowl odds at plus 600, while the Buccaneers have somehow dropped to plus 6,500 and are at plus 310 to win the NFC South. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Rev Wrapping things up here on a Wednesday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast, and Graham Barton is getting rudely awakened to the world of NFL football, and he's going to be all the better for it. Barton is readjusting to being a center after spending most of his time at Duke as the left tackle. The Bucs drafted him to bulk up the interior of their offensive line, which is one of the two weakest position groups on the team. So while we all have high hopes and expectations for Barton, that does not mean that he's going to walk into the NFL and immediately be that all-pro player, that Pro Bowler. And while that's what many of us believe he can be, that takes a lot of work and a lot of dedication. One thing Barton does have going for him already in terms of his development is the fact that every single day, this guy has to go toe-to-toe with Kalen Kancey, as well as one of the best nose tackles in the NFL in Vita Vea. There aren't many better ways to get up to speed and really hone your craft in the NFL than trying to stop a player that most centers in the NFL actually have no chance of really stopping. Barton was asked about going up against those two, and he said, quote, "It's fun. It's awesome to go against guys like that now because they're some of the best in the league and around the league that I'll see all year." Being able to go against guys like that, it's sort of the sink or swim mentality. You either lose a rep and you learn from it against those guys, or you win a rep and you build a little bit of confidence. I think building on that and being able to go against those guys over and over will make me a better player. I'm super grateful for guys like Vita and Kalen and all the guys in that room. We've got a super talented defensive line. It's really awesome to see that every day, end quote. This is the way players get better. Think about Zion McCollum, where he's been to where he is now, having to go up against Mike Evans in practice. Think about, take it away from the Buccaneers for a moment. Think about how good the 49ers defense is, and it's largely in part because they have to go up against the 49ers offense every day. Think of where Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean started out compared to where they are now, or at least in the case of Jamel Dean, the ability that we've seen from him that we're hoping he can get back to. And it's because they've had to face Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown and Gronk and Tom Brady in practices. This is how Barton is going to realize his potential sooner than later. There might be 2 or 3 players in the NFL at nose tackle that you can put above or in the same conversation with Vita Vea. And now he's lost a little weight. He's gained a little quickness. He hasn't lost any of his strength. He's going to be that much harder to defend. Barton has that task for hours on hours a day. Not only that, but he's having to deal with Vea and Kancey while also getting an understanding of Cohen's playbook and the responsibilities of the center in terms of pre-snap reads and calls. There's a huge mental aspect of the position beyond the physical demands. We know that Graham Barton is an incredibly smart guy. He went to Duke. That's not a low IQ establishment in terms of playing, whether you're playing sports or not. That is a difficult school to succeed in. Barton talked about how it's more than what he's used to, saying, quote, "As opposed to guard or tackle, maybe a little bit more just because you're sort of setting up the play for the offensive line. It starts with your identifications and your calls. It is slightly more of a burden, but I'd say the offensive line position in the NFL as a whole is more of a mental burden that people may not necessarily realize." You see a lot throughout the year from different defenses, and you've got to be able to block all of it on any play. I just think adjusting to that is going to take some time, but I think I'm coming along well and just trying to take it one day at a time and keep learning and keep growing and keep adjusting to this offense. I think it's going well so far, end quote. Well, welcome to the NFL, Rook. Have a complete understanding of everything that you're looking at when your coach is one of the best at disguising what he's doing while also being responsible for keeping Vita Vea away from getting your quarterback, or, I don't know, since he can't touch the quarterback, how about blowing up Rashad White behind the line of scrimmage? All of this will play out. when he has to go up against other teams, starting with the Cincinnati Bengals in 11 days. But Barton's adjustment to the NFL is accelerated because of the jobs that he has to do in practice alone. Whether that's the mental aspect of Liam Cohen's offense, plus what he's seeing from Todd Bowles' defense, whether it's the physical aspect of taking on Vita Vea or Kalijah Cansey or a blitzing Servassier Dennis or Levante David. Graham Barton has had a lot thrown at him this first week of training camp, and all it's doing is making him realize his potential as a player and the potential that Jason Light and this staff saw in him when they made him the first-round pick. One quick note before we get out of here. As of this recording, a little after 12 o'clock on Wednesday, guard Sua Opeta had been taken off the field Tuesday night with an injury, and there's been no word as of yet, as I'm recording this, on the severity of that injury. But, of course, Opeta and Ben Bredesen have been competing for the starting left guard job. And while Bredesen has the early lead, is taking those first team reps, that competition is far from over. However, if Opeta is going to miss any significant time, not only does that effectively end the competition and Bredesen will be your starting left guard, but that could also severely hurt the Buccaneers' depth across the offensive line. It's something that you for sure need to keep an eye on over the next day or so. I would guess that we're going to get an update on that at some point during the day Wednesday. Possibly going to be talking about that with Evan Klosky on Thursday's episode. But you go back on, was it Sunday that I did my pre-training camp? I guess it was a week ago, Sunday. I did my pre-training camp 53-man roster prediction and talked extensively about how important it is that they have all of these offensive linemen as depth pieces that can play multiple positions across the line. Opeta goes down, and he's pretty much an interior offensive lineman. He's pretty much a guard. There's not a whole lot of cross-training there with him. But you go to guys like Robert Hainsey, guys like Justin School. You know, these guys can play multiple positions across the offensive line. That's why that cross-training, that ability to play multiple positions is so vital. If Opeta suffered a serious injury and is going to be out multiple weeks bleeding into the regular season, fingers crossed, hopefully this is not a season-ending situation, but that's why that depth has to be there, you know, for all the positions with a minimal amount of guys. That'll allow you to keep a Caleb DeLoach, that'll allow you to keep a Rashad Wisdom, because you have, you know, 4 or 5 offensive linemen that can play 2 or 3 positions apiece. So keep an eye out for the Opeta news. It's going to be coming down the pike, but certainly something that you're really going to want to keep an eye on. That is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Please check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Make sure you're following on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. And of course, make sure you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.